My name is Aruna. I use they, she pronouns. I am the facilitator and content supporter, creator for the series. We're really excited that you're all joining us. So we're going to be talking today about adoption and fostering. And so we'll get into that very soon. This is part of a series of workshops that Seed and Sprout is doing through Birthmark. It's a really exciting summer series of workshops that are geared towards Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus communities on how to bring little people into their lives, whether that is through what we're going to talk about today, adoption fostering, or whether that's through a fertility process, whether that's through DIY home inseminations, or if that's through all the different ways that people are able to bring little people into their lives. So today is a pretty important and I think going to be very discussion based, and we actually have an amazing facilitator who's going to be joining us today. Like all of our sessions, we're also going to be opening up with Thunder Sharma, who is an incredible young person, and I'll let them introduce themselves, who is given us the privilege of experiencing what they have to offer. It's a very big privilege of mine to call them my family and to have them a part of my life. And so I learn a lot from them. So I'm going to offer up the space to Thunder now to open us up, to also ground us in the conversation that we're going to have today, which for a lot of communities, in particular Black, Indigenous communities, can be a very heavy one, can be one that is very rife with a lot of complications and hard realities of colonization and ongoing genocide. So we can't have these conversations about adoption or fostering without that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to ground ourselves in that, and also how to consider as BIPOC people and also as LGBTQ people, how to navigate these spaces as people who also want to offer young people these homes. So yeah, I'm going to give it off to Thunder now and spotlight them. And yeah, thank you so much.
Auntie. Hey there. Hi, everyone. So as my auntie Aruna said, today is kind of heavy, although it's so full of love and so many beautiful things. When children come into our lives, or young people, when family finds you, it's such a beautiful thing. Coming home, unfortunately, BIPOC can deal with a lot of shit. And a lot of things have happened in the past, and we're starting to talk about that just a little bit in so-called Canada. But a lot of the time we don't talk about what's happening currently. Children, the child welfare system, how many of our children are being ripped from our families. I didn't mean to start off this way, but I think I'm gonna actually tell you about a couple years ago. So my mom died when I was 16, and I moved to Chimnising, Christian Island. And for, I think, 31 years, there wasn't a single child apprehended from the island, from any family. And there was a change in leadership. And overnight, what seemed like overnight, in about a month span, over 100 children were taken. I remember when the first child was taken, the first family was targeted. It happened when my niece was at school, and she watched her cousins get ripped from their family in front of everyone, the whole community. They didn't take them aside. They didn't talk to them first. They didn't do anything like that. They stormed into the classroom and they removed them, and they talked about what was happening in front of everyone. And my niece came home crying, screaming, because she didn't understand who they were and how they could possibly come in and take our kids. Unfortunately, that was the first of many, many, many incidents that month alone. I myself am a second generation survivor of residential school. So that means that my grandmother attended. I'm also a first generation survivor of the 60s scoop, which means that my mother and my aunties were removed from my grandmother. I am very, very, very lucky to say that my mother and my auntie returned home, but one of my aunties, Francine, did not. I grew up not knowing my auntie. My auntie still really isn't in our lives, but I try to reach out and tell her we love her and we care for her, and keep that connection going as much as we can, through all the pain. It's really painful because also my grandmother isn't here and my mother isn't here. So trying to balance that relationship building without them is hard. I'm actually going to read you a little piece that I wrote that's part of a larger poem, and then I'm going to sing you a song to open. So this is from a poem I started writing. Sorry, I'm a little shaken talking about my family, but I always think it's a really vulnerable and really beautiful thing to share about our own families. So I try to do that when I can. But what I'm going to read you is from a poem I wrote kind of out of anger, trying to just honor and figure out what it feels like for me as a second generation survivor. I only said that for the first time out loud about a week ago. And I burst into tears out of anger. Why do I need to say that? How come the family members of those who are abusing my family don't identify themselves in that way, So anyways, my favorite memories of being at my grandma's include Christmas mornings and receiving bags of mixed nuts and mandarins and licorice, and hearing about how excited the children were to receive their goodies at church, that they would all wake up early and wait to be called down for morning mass. I remember eating scalloped potatoes with ham on Easter because it was Nokomis's favorite holiday meal, and family gatherings and community members dropping in to visit and help clean. So many loving hands went into family feast, and so many memories were shared. I also remember springtime and sitting on the 4th floor at Wigwoman Terrace and running around the gardens and pushing my grandmother's walker into the night. I remember lying awake into the early hours of Sunday morning and listening to the stories about when my grandmother came home and she didn't even know who her own mother was. So she sat and waited until finally her mother came for her. And the times her only friend suddenly called her Jagnashikwe, white girl, and stopped talking to her. My grandmother was taken at the age of 3, and by the time she came home, she didn't even know how to pronounce her own middle name. At the age of 6, I sat listening to my grandmother and her friends talk about how she thought her middle name was Joanne, and it wasn't until she returned home that she learned her name was Geraldine Joan Cameron. And it wasn't until decades later when she would learn to say her spirit name, Akina Mago Kwe. Her name talks about her walk on this earth and the impact her love has left everywhere she touches. So that's part of a much larger piece I wrote, just thinking of my grandmother and thinking of the ways trauma still exists in my body, in my family's body, in my children, the ways that it will manifest. But on that note, I want to now kind of segue into kind of a nicer story of coming home. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that my mom passed when I was 16. I also grew up without a father. My father was deported. My father is from Trinidad and he was deported before I was born. So I grew up with a single mother who was really awesome and taught me everything and gave me everything from having nothing herself. And I can't imagine the kind of incredible powers that my mother had. So this next song came to me. I am someone who deals with mental illness, someone who lives with personality disorder, which can be very isolating and does lead to suicidal ideation very, very often in my life. So this song that I'm going to share with you came to me on a night that I was feeling really, really, really awful. And I really did think that I was going to go home to go see my mom. So to put it kind of like a little lighter. But this song is called Lateral Love, and it is for my auntie Jemias. My auntie Jemias is one of my favorite people in the entire world. I think it's because honestly, she's always been so real with me and so honest and so genuine, and has always done a really, really beautiful job of honoring me and making sure that she's respecting me. So calling me in when things aren't right or when I'm maybe floating a little too far. In Mohawk, we say Ista for mom, but we also say Ista for auntie. And every time I call my Ista jams, when I call her Ista, I always want to cry because I really feel that love, that mama love from my auntie. And, even though I'm in a place where I don't technically have parents parenting me, I don't feel like I'm being left on my own or discarded or anything like that, because I have beautiful family members who have stepped up. Indigenous kinship is so important. And my auntie really, really lives that teaching. So this is my auntie's song, Lateral Love. I go, thank you for allowing me to share. I hope that brought you good medicine. Thank you, Auntie, for allowing me to open. Love you so much. Sending you all love. You know.
Thank you so much, Thunder. That was so beautiful, and really helpful to ground us in this really important, I think, and big conversation that we're having. And yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful that you were here to share with us, and thank you for sharing that song for Anti-Jams. Yeah, and just wanting to take a second for that, actually. That really, I felt that really deeply. So I'm really grateful for you sharing. Yeah. Ooh, okay, before I start crying, I'm gonna share the bio of our amazing facilitator, who is a friend of mine and someone who I admire really greatly, and who is someone who I've worked with many times in a lot of really great organizational spaces. So Charles Little is a queer, cisgendered person of color of African descent. Charles is first and foremost a parent. He, along with his husband, are parents to 2 children in their mid-20s, a 3 and 1-year-old, all who came into their lives through the child welfare system in Ontario. Charles has been a part of parent panels talking about his journey to parenthood, and has facilitated and co-facilitated 2 LGBTQ+ parent-to-be workshops for the past 10 years. Charles is always learning, and is currently in school studying Indigenous social work. So if everyone could give us a big round of applause for Charles, I'm going to pin him up and spotlight him for everyone. And oh, I don't know what happened there. Pin and spotlight. I don't know what happened, but yeah, okay, I'm gonna send it over to Charles.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Thunder, for that. That was amazing. I have a presentation that I want to go over. Some of it I will go over quickly. Some of it I'll talk a little bit more and elaborate a little bit more on. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in. Aruna can interrupt me at any point if there's a question pertaining to a particular slide, or if there's questions at the end, we can go through them as well. I am by no means an expert in this field. I don't think anybody is, but I've been through this and in this pretty much my whole life in various ways. And like Aruna said, I've been a foster parent. I am now officially an adoptive parent as of June 18th. I got the letter in the mail a couple days ago. So yeah, it was a little anticlimactic because it was just no judge, but it was just a letter in the mail. But I think in grounding myself, I think that was actually more appropriate, because when I think about my child and the severing of his birth family, I don't think personally that it should be some big, huge celebration. We're talking about lifelong trauma that's associated with somebody coming into my life. So every day, in every way, I ground myself in that fact and try to help my child as they grow, and my children as they are older, and knowing that that their birth family will always be in their lives. And there's no matter what legal document says, there is no end to the love of their birth family. My presentation seems to have disappeared. 1 minute. Okay, just give me a minute.
Charles, in the meantime, did you want me to talk about the other sessions maybe that are coming up?
Sure.
Okay. Oh, well, we see your screen, but
Yeah, I just have to find it. I don't know why it closed.
okay, got it. So while folks are waiting, I can talk a little bit about the other sessions that are coming up. So the next series of workshops that we have is the next one that's going to be taking place is the, oh, no, I need to get it up on mine. The next one is going to be on fertility awareness for everyone. So that's going to be, I'm going to be teaching a little bit about that and then talking specifically about fertility and what that looks like for folks who are looking to use fertility clinics, also who are doing at-home inseminations, and any of those kinds of things. And so there'll, as we talked about at our panel the last session, there are lots of different ways that people can use fertility to get pregnant, and so and that can look like DIY with a known donor, unknown donor. So we're going to talk about all the nuances around that, and in particular, another really cool thing about this workshop is we're actually going to go into some fertility mapping with folks. So we're actually going to have you take a look at your own fertility if that's something that you're doing, and then be able to learn how to map that out. So I'm going to give you tools and tips on that, and then also how to do that yourself at home, and then also what it would look like to do it with a clinic, because those are very different looking things. But there are DIY ways that can actually help you kind of get to know your body a little bit more in order to go through a fertility process, whether that's within a clinic setting or not. The workshop after that is called Egg, Sperm, and a Place to Grow. So we're going to talk about where we get eggs, where we get sperm, and then where we get the uterus to put it all together for if you're getting pregnant or wanting to get pregnant. A big conversation for a lot of folks is where do you even get sperm, because sperm banks, especially for BIPOC people, don't work. So anyways, yeah, there's lots that we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but I think, Charles, are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. I'll mute, go right ahead.
Okay, so this is sort of the overlook of what I'm going to be talking about today. So a moment on the path, African Canadian families.
So Charles, we can't see the actual PowerPoint.
Really?
It's still in your folder. There we go. Perfect.
I don't know what it is, but okay. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the process of adoption and fostering, what education is needed, what options are available when it comes to adoption, a little bit about mentoring, and some possible next steps and resources. And then, of course, any questions people have. As I said before, please feel free to interrupt me during the presentation. So I just wanted to, this comes from the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Society. They did some reconciliation around 2017. And this is the statement that is currently on their website. So we apologize to the children, mothers, and fathers who have been hurt by the 60 scoops, which saw thousands of Indigenous children taken from their homes, families, and communities across Canada. The 60 scoop and many current practices have resulted in cultural genocide for the Indigenous people of Ontario. The words of apology and regret I share today are an acknowledgement that we must do better. We have a long path towards reconciliation and healing and these historic injustices. So also, when we talk about the child welfare system, we also have to talk about the disproportionality, disparity, and discrimination in services provided to Black and Aboriginal children and families by child welfare agencies across North America. In Canada, there is a disproportionate amount of Aboriginal children and Black children in the system. In the US, it's a little bit different because they have a little bit different demographics. But again, in North America and around the world, Indigenous people, people of color, are disproportionately affected by the child welfare system. In 2017, Ontario Child and Family Act changed a lot of the terminology, the direction of the act changed. So part of the system was, prior to 2017, children were called society wards or crown wards. That's no longer used. The new act refers to children who are in interim society care or extended society care. The new act also does not refer to children being abandoned or to runaways. The new act speaks of bringing children to a place of safety instead of being apprehended or of dealing with matters and not dealing with children. I think this is significant in a way. It's not just a matter of changing terms, it's significant in the way that we think about children in care and how the societies, children's aid societies, deal with our children in care and think about every interaction they have with our children in care. A little definition of adoption. Adoption is a permanent legal transfer of all parental rights from one person or persons to another person or persons. Adoptive parents have the same rights and responsibilities as biological parents, and adoptive children have all the same emotional, social, legal, and kinship benefits as biological children. So after if there isn't a finalization of adoption like there was with me, there is a change in the birth certificate where the previous parents, the birth parents' names are removed and your name is added, or names are added, depending on how many parents there are on the birth certificate. Foster caregivers provide temporary, safe, caring, and stable homes that support the development of children. They come from diverse backgrounds. They represent the cultural diversity of our community. They are an important part of the child welfare team that includes children's aid society staff, volunteers, other professionals, and the family of origin of children who are in society care. Who can adopt or foster? So one of the biggest things when we're talking about adoption and fostering, it has not been in the past, but it is becoming more and more important, is that agencies try to place children with cultures when the culture of the child when possible. For example, my two children are the same cultural background as me. So I am Italian and of African descent. Both my children are Italian and African descent. That was very important for the agency to place children with a parent who would represent their culture. Another aspect is age. People ask that all the time. Is there an age maximum or age requirement? There is a minimum age, I believe it's 25 when we're talking about adoption. But when we're talking about maximum, there is no maximum age, although many agencies will talk about a 40-year gap. So what they're talking about is they don't want, they're trying to minimize trauma. So they want to have, at least one of the adoptive parents or foster parents within a 40-year gap. It's mainly affects when we're talking about adoption. Marital or couple status does not make a difference. Eligibility to adopt or foster, single parents can adopt or foster. It's more about what support systems you have in place when it comes to the child. So if you're going to work, how are you taking a leave from work? How are you going to connect with the child? How are you going to build a connection with your child if you're working? And what other people are going to be in your child's life? If you have extended family, if you have friends, co-parents, whatever it may be, how is your child going to be supported is what they're looking at, really. Income. So the basic thing is, can you support yourself and the child? They ask you to set up a budget. When it comes to fostering, there is a per diem to help support the child, but that's not to help support you and pay for your mortgage and pay for rent and all that kind of stuff. You have to be self-sufficient prior to having a foster child. It's not considered an income. It's considered reimbursement for expenses, and it's considered assistance for the child and not for you. So characteristics of a parent, and this goes for fostering and it also goes for adoption. Loving, caring, dedicated, committed, understanding, patient, resourceful, compassionate, willing to learn, accepting, advocates, and good communicators. The children that come into your home, whether you're fostering or adopting, are going to need advocates. They're going to need people with compassion. They're, of course, going to need people who are loving. And we're talking about, when we talk about children coming into our homes and we talk about characteristics of a parent, what often comes up, at least when I've talked to many social workers, is what can you bring to the table? What have you learned in your life that will relate to a child in care, that will make you a great advocate for this child? What have you done? Have you advocated for yourself? Have you had a childhood that has made you stronger, made you more resilient? When we talk about queer families, social workers often look at queer families as a great example of advocates, of people who are willing to learn, who are compassionate, who are resourceful. We've had to be resourceful when it comes to parenting. Just being a parent, we've had to be resourceful. So we actually often will make amazing parents, and people will say that it's stacked against us as queer parents, but it's actually the opposite. Often people will look for people who are a little bit different, who don't fit the box per se when it comes to parenting. So a little bit about the history of LGBTQ community and adoption. So in Ontario, Ontario was the first province to support same-sex adoption. Toronto CAS was the first agency to complete a same-sex public adoption. And first it was a single person being finalized in 1995, and then a couple in the year 2000. And now many queer families, gay families, lesbian families have adopted through CAS in Ontario. So there's three main adoption options. So there's public adoption, private adoption, intercountry or international adoption. And there's also relative adoption or interprovincial adoption, so adopting from other provinces. What are the requirements for adoption and fostering? So the requirements for adoption and fostering are exactly the same. So a safe home study and pride training. When you're talking about any adoption in Ontario, these are the requirements, and the same for fostering. It doesn't matter if you're doing fostering from a private agency or if you're doing it from a CAS in your area. So the SAFE home study, the Structured Analysis Family Evaluation home study, contains 2 parts that are completed concurrently. The written report and the list of collateral documents. So all prospective adoptive parents must participate in the home study process. Based on the information gathered, your adoption practitioner over the course of 4 to 6 weeks will conduct interviews. They'll give you a questionnaire. Many topics will come up there. So motivation for adopting, education, career plans, your lifestyle, hobbies, interests, family background and childhood, the view and your views on parenting will come up. The home study will focus on your strengths and challenges unique to adoption and how they can be addressed. You can, at the end, you will read and sign the final document. It won't be a surprise, and then it'll be available to other workers. So examples of some of the collateral information that will be collected. So you'll have to get reference letters depending on how many people are in your family or that are going to be adopting or fostering. Will depend on how many reference letters you need. You'll have to get a police and child welfare check. So the police check will have to be from anywhere that you have lived over the age of 18 for more than 6 months. So that can be, anywhere in Canada, any jurisdiction in Canada, and that can also be in any other country. Child welfare check is done by the child welfare agency that you're with. The police checks is a responsibility of yourself. It can be pricey depending on how many places you've lived, or it can be, for example, it's $40 with Toronto if Toronto is the only place you ever lived. So financial statements, so you'll have to show them your income, your debts, all that kind of stuff. Medical reports, so you'll have to go to your family doctor and get a medical report that basically shows that you're okay to adopt, that you're physically and mentally stable is what the document states. And people will talk about, I've gone to therapy, I don't want to disclose that sort of stuff. What that shows is that you've gone to therapy, you're dealing with your stuff, and that you're more than willing to take your child to therapy. Because when we talk about adoption, when we talk about fostering, it's a lot of trauma, and your child is going to need support. So are you going to advocate for your child in the same way that you've advocated for yourself and your own mental health, right? So it's not a negative that you've had to deal with mental health issues. Almost everybody has had to deal with mental health issues. It's how have you dealt with your mental health issues is what they want to know. Have you dealt with them or are you ignoring them? And then when we talk about adoption, many times a lot of the stuff that, even during the home study, after you've been finalized, during the process of meeting children, this is not only traumatic for yourself, it's traumatic for the children. So do you have a support system to deal with these feelings that are going to come up? Other documents that you will need is marriage and divorce certificates, employment information. The home study can take anywhere between 6 to 12 months. It can be a little bit quicker. It can be a little bit longer. It depends on the individual. It depends on who you're working with, whether you're doing it privately or whether you're doing it with a local CES. Local CESs can be busy, so it can take a little bit longer. If you're doing it privately, that actually costs money. So it can be about $2,500 to $3,500 to get that home study done privately. And the main benefit of that would be it's quicker. So the home study updates. So the home study itself only needs to be done once. However, certain documents like your police check, your child welfare checks, they actually expire in 2 years. So I've had to have my police checks done several times during my process. So those are things that you'll have to do again, but like references and things like that, unless things change, you don't need to do those again. If you move, you have to update that. Just little minor things that you'll have to do when it comes to the home study, but the main, like, you know, I would assume that your views on parenting haven't changed, a lot of that stuff. Your background, your family life, a lot of that hasn't changed, so you wouldn't have to update that. The adoption practitioner. Depending on the adoption option you pursue, the home study is completed by a CAS practitioner or a private practitioner contracted by you. Private adoption practitioners are licensed by the Ministry of Child and Youth Services. You can get a list of private practitioners on, there's a link here, but it's on government website. You can just Google it, or if you're on the Adoption Council of Ontario, there's a link through there as well. Home studies are portable. So a family gets adopt ready. Once they complete their home study and their education, they become adopt ready. So a family can then pursue private adoption, public adoption, or one inter-country adoption simultaneously. If you're looking at public adoption and you're doing a CAS worker, they will only do public adoption. If you want to look at any of the other options, you have to go with a private adoption worker who can facilitate a public adoption as well. So the education. So PRIDE, Parent Resources for Information, Development, and Education is the name of the PRIDE course. So all prospective adoptive families in Ontario must complete PRIDE training. It's designed to better prepare parents for the responsibility of welcoming and raising adoptive children. So you'll watch a bunch of videos. When I took the training, it was a bunch of videos from the 70s. So people with big afros, and it was very American based as well. So it wasn't very helpful, but what it did is really talk about some of the issues that you may have to deal with when you're adopting, and it sort of addressed the disproportionate amount of children of color in the system, and what white families had to do when it comes to, and had to think about when it comes to adopting children of color. So when I took my PRIDE training, which was more than 10 years ago, I was the only person of color in the room, and everybody else in the room was white. And a lot of that hasn't really changed. There's a lot more white families adopting than families of color and queer families. So the PRIDE training comprises of 27 hours of content. That can be, for me, it was 9 sessions over 3 hours. That can also mean a couple of weekends. So topics include attachment, loss issues, child development and management, and challenges specific to adoptive children's needs. PRIDE only needs to be done once. PRIDE can be done in advance of your home study or simultaneously. If you're going to do it privately, it ranges from $700 to $800 for a single person, $1,400 to about $1,600 for a couple. As we're in a pandemic, a lot of the PRIDE training right now is done virtually, but that was a direction even before the pandemic that it was going in, to reduce costs and to get to more people and to get to it faster. So what now? So adoption and fostering process in Ontario. There's 3 sort of spheres, as I mentioned. So there's public, there's private, and intercountry. So the most used method of adoption is public adoption. The sets I have are a little bit outdated, but on average, there's about 800 public adoptions each year. If you look at the stats for the last 10 years, it's been decreasing every year for a few different reasons. One, the direction of the child welfare system has gone from, as it stated in 2017, from apprehending to looking at what is the best interest of the children and trying to reunite families, or if children have to come into care, looking at kinship families instead of looking at non-related adoptive parents. So people who are looking at to adopt children who are not related to them are waiting longer than they have in the past, which is actually a good thing when you look at it. I mean, it may be difficult for the family that's wanting to adopt, but it's great for these children who are not being put into the system, who are being put with family, with friends, in communities where they're already established, where they have family, where they are going to know their culture, where they're going to not have to be ripped from their community, where they can still have connections with everybody that they've known before, where they can still have connections with aunts and uncles, where they're not being basically raised by strangers. So in the public system, children range in age from infant to teens. Newborns are very unlikely in the public system because of legislation, because of many different factors. When a child comes to the system, even if the child comes into the system and comes into care from birth, they will immediately go into foster care, and they will try to work with the birth family on many different things to reunite that child with their birth family. And if that does not work out and that child is not able to go back to their birth family or go with their birth family, depending on the situation, they will look at kin, as I said, they will look at extended family, and they will look very, very hard at those situations before they even consider adoption in the system and a child being placed for adoption. The public adoptions are facilitated, as I said, by children's aid societies in Ontario. In Ontario, there are, and it's changing constantly, there are 50 designated children's aid societies, 12 are Indigenous and child and family well-being agencies, and 3 are faith-based, so 2 Catholic and 1 Jewish. And those dynamics change constantly. Some are amalgamating, and more Indigenous child and family well-being agencies are being established. CSs are seeking families for children in extended care who have adoption as their permanency plan. They have limited, CSs have limited resources to complete home studies. So they're looking for children who, parents who match their children in care. So for example, if they have a lot of older children in care, they're gonna look for parents who are willing to adopt children who are older. If a particular agency has a lot of children of color, they're gonna look for a lot of families who reflect the children in their care. If they have a lot of siblings, again, they're going to look for families who are willing to adopt siblings or have the capacity to adopt siblings. You can adopt a child from any CS in the province once you are adopt ready. You are placed on a database which is accessible to all adoption workers who meet once a month to place children in care. how CASs work. Each CAS will decide how to bring families into their system. Some CASs have a wait list, some have a criteria for inclusion, as I said, except older children. Calling your local CAS adoption department is the best way to find out. You can also go online and sort of look, but the best way to find out what their sort of criteria is really just to call them and ask them. Often CSs will have information night. Again, it's probably online at the moment, but it's basically they're telling you what their criteria is, what their focus is, and I've gone to a couple of these information nights, and what the basic premise is that, and to put it sort of bluntly, is they don't really care about adoptive parents. What they care about is the children in care. So they're looking at what families can they bring in that will best support the children that they currently have in care. As I said, you must complete your paperwork in your local jurisdiction, but you can adopt from across the province. So we encourage you to talk to your local CES and find out more about the situation and processes. You can find a list of CSs on Adopt Ontario getting started page. So you can find out their numbers, or you can just Google it. If you live in Toronto, your local CS is going to be Toronto CAS, or it's going to be the Jewish and Child and Family, that sort of thing, or Catholic CAS. The pros of public adoption. So you get a lot of health and familial information. There are more children available for public adoption versus private adoption. There is a need for diverse families to adopt children from foster care. CS will support family through lengthy decision-making, information sharing, and transition phase. And there are some supports and subsidies available post-placement. There are subsidies when we're talking about sibling groups, and there are subsidies. It's a targeted subsidy from the Ontario government when we're talking about children over the age of 8. Both of those are based on a family's income. Traits best suited for public adoption. So willing to consider older children, willing to consider siblings, and willing to consider children who have special needs. Often you will see things like developmental delays, autism, and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. These will be things that you will see in many of the profiles of children that you learn about. And you really need to explore what does this mean? What does this diagnosis mean? What is, when we're talking about mental health issues, we also talk about trauma, and what does it mean for children in care to have trauma, and how can we help them through it for the rest of their life? It's not going to be, it doesn't matter how old the child was when they came to you, they're going to experience trauma of that separation from their primary caregiver. And how can you support that? Do you have the tools to support that? Or, can you get the tools? Can you reach out to other people to find those tools? Another big thing that thankfully is happening in the child welfare system is openness. So contact between birth family and adoptive family, that can be the birth mother, the birth father, cousin, aunt, uncle. It's a spectrum. It could mean exchanging letters. It could mean photos. It could mean in-person visits. It can grow and change over time. Some of the openness will be formal or court ordered. So that can mean, 6 visits a year. It could mean, and then that's ordered by the court. It could also, if the children have siblings, older siblings or younger siblings, the court could order that you have a connection and visitation with those siblings, and not necessarily with the birth parents. If the siblings were adopted with other families, they could, order that as well. Should always focus, the openness should always focus on the needs of the child first. Um, I've heard people talk about the situation with the birth family and, different issues that the birth family are going through. But what we really need to do is look at the child first, and it will be difficult for the children and it will be difficult for you, but I'm going to say this bluntly, and that your feelings really don't matter when it comes to the child. The openness is really important for the children. It's really important for them to know where they came from, why they're with you, and what their history is, what their culture is. So openness is amazing, and if it can be facilitated for your family, I would absolutely encourage it. And it's never like a start and stop sort of thing. I would always say, even if you don't have openness now, to really keep that fresh in your mind and be open to openness. Private adoption. So currently, there's an average of 90 to 120 private adoptions in Ontario each year. And again, that's going down. This is when birth parents make a decision to voluntarily place a child for adoption. The pros of private adoption: availability of newborns. So usually this is direct from the hospital placement. So prior to the child being born, those birth parents or parent, often it is a mother who decides on a particular family is going to adopt their child. So there's often availability of health and familiar information. There's an opportunity for the child to have a relationship with his or her birth parents in the future. Parent traits best suited for private adoption. So financially prepared, patient, there is no time frame, comfortable marketing yourself, and comfortable with openness. Private adoption is much more expensive than public adoption. Private adoption in Ontario, agencies and licensees are licensed by the Ministry of Child and Youth Services, and which oversees adoption plan. Each adoption team includes a licensee, a birth parent counselor, and an adoption worker. Each adoption plan must be approved by the Ministry of Child and Youth Services before placement can happen. Ministry must have adoption paperwork, social and medical histories of birth parents, and information about how the match happened. And this is similar to public adoption, except you don't have to pay for the information. Private adoption in Ontario: your best opportunity for placement is to spread the word about your interest in adoption. Usually, prospective families meet with birth parents prior to birth, and the child is placed from the hospital. Birth parents sign the consents when the child is over 7 days old. They cannot do it prior, and the birth families have 21 days to change their mind. How to adopt privately: you complete your paperwork and training on your own. You sign up with private agency or licensee. You can register with private online matching service, like Adopt Canada, and the cost varies with time involved. Approximately 400 and this intercountry adoption, so the term is international adoption as well. So about 450 Ontario families adopt internationally. Children can range from 1 year on, often from orphanages around the world. Ontario has programs with a number of countries. Cost is about $30,000 to $50,000. It's very similar paperwork, but this is often not available to LGBT parents. unless they lie about their status or marital status. Most countries around the world do not allow single parents to adopt, and all countries around the world do not allow LGBTQ parents to adopt from internationally, other than the US. So the US is actually the only country which will allow, which you can, from Canada, adopt. Relative adoption can often be completed directly through the Ontario Family Court. Only adoption in Ontario for which home study and pride training is not required. So this can include step-parent adoption, grandparent, aunt, uncle, great uncle, or great aunt. And mentorship. So mentorship is a personal developmental relationship in which a more experienced or more knowledgeable person helps to guide a less experienced or less knowledgeable person. The mentor may be older or younger, but have a certain area of expertise. It is a learning and development partnership between someone with vast experience or someone who wants to learn. Soy Connect is an example of a mentorship program. They have 3 mentorship streams: Soy Group Mentorship, Soy Individual Mentorship, and the Black Queer Youth Mentorship Project. Possibilities for next steps. So discussion about avenue you would like to explore. So really think about what works best for you. If that's public adoption, if that's private adoption, and sign up. If you're looking at public adoption, you can sign up for the pride training. It doesn't actually cost anything if you're going through public adoption, and that will really give you sort of a crash course on the feelings you may experience when it comes to adoption. You can call your local CAS, call agencies or licensees, attend agency information sessions, attend a class like this. You can call up, if you're looking at private adoption, you can call up a private adoption practitioner. Ask them what their rates are, ask them their experiences. You can start the process. You can talk to other adoptive families. That's a great way of learning what it's like to adopt. What are the experience of adoptive families? If you're a white family or a white person and you would like to adopt, talk to people who have adopted. Talk to other white families who have adopted children of color, if that's, because that is often what happens. Ask them about their experiences. There's many things that people didn't know as a white family, what it would be like to adopt a child of color. When there's so many things that people wouldn't think about when we're talking about adopting children of color. You can read books on adoption. So some resources. So Adoption Council of Ontario has information sessions. They have adoption resource exchanges, which are is where they present children who are harder to place in the province, and they have fairs, and they happen every 6 months. They're now happening online, like many other things. And then after adoption, there's courses like Pathways to Permanency, which Adoption Council of Ontario does. And they also do many webinars, and you can check them out. They have how-tos and different things that you'll experience. They have webinars on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, many different things. And there's also Adopt for Life. So Adopt for Life is an adoptive parent support group. So everybody on there, from the admin, from the directors, they're all adoptive parents or foster parents. So what happens is, whether they're paid or not, they're supporting other adoptive parents in the process from their expertise, from what they've learned. So it's actually a great resource. There's a section in there for people who have adopted. There's a section in there for people who are looking to adopt and want support around that. When you're talking about foster agencies, so there's private foster agencies. So 514, which is an agency focused on LGBTQ children and families. And there's also another one called Key Assets. There's many different fostering agencies, private. What I would caution people is look at fostering, private fostering agencies with a lens around what exactly, how are they supporting adoptive parents? How are they going to support foster parents? And how are they supporting their children in care? What training is available? What requirements are available? What requirements do they hold for their foster parents? I've heard a lot of bad stories when it comes to certain private agencies. So really look at that, because there's nothing worse than being a foster parent and being so frustrated because you don't have the training or you're not getting support, and you're not getting support for your children. So that's it for my presentation. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Charles. That was really awesome and really informative. I know that there are lots of nuances around what path people are going to take depending on what works for their families. There was a question that came in the chat, and it's from Marsha. I'll just read it to you, and then feel free to answer. It was when you were talking about the interview process. So, hi, it's Marsha. I have a question. If you were interested in adopting or fostering a child, but you already have children in your home, are your current children involved in the process in any way, and will they be interviewed, etc.?
Yes. So that's a great question. So depending on the age of the children, they will absolutely be a part of the process. If they're old enough to be interviewed, they will be interviewed as well. And if they're, say, for example, teenagers, they will be asked their opinion on whether they think, if you're talking about fostering, if they think it's okay for, what is their opinion about the whole process? What do they know about the process? So you will have to educate your child before the social worker comes in on what exactly is this process going to be. Will they be sharing a room, for example? That's perfectly fine, depending on the agency. Some private agencies don't allow children to share rooms at all, but the Toronto CS allows it depending on the age of the child and their sex assigned at birth. Yeah, but they will definitely be a part of the process. It's everybody who lives in your household. So for example, if you have a guest living in your basement and there's no separation, they will be part of the process as well. Or if you have a co-parent who they'll be part of the process. If you have, your partner's living with you, for example, but is not going to be a parent, they will still be part of the process.
That's good to know. Are there any other questions from anyone else? We're opening it up for questions, just in general at this point. So I guess something that I often think about when I think about adoption, and I mean, you touched on it a lot, and I think is like the issue when it comes to, if you have, let's say I'm fostering or going to be adopting a child, and the family wants to take them back afterwards. Like, what happens in those situations, and what are the possibilities of not co-sharing, but like also like family connections, and what are some possibilities that you've seen in different kinds of family creation through adoption and fostering?
Yeah, so through adoption, legally, once the parents, the birth parents, rights have been severed, they can't then go back and, you know, demand sort of any rights or the children in any way. But what can happen, and if the adoptive parents are open for this, and hopefully they are, is a connection with that family. So visiting, I've seen many times where, you know, children have been visiting with grandparents, have been visiting with cousins, have been in some way, there's a connection to the birth parents in some way. You know, for Christmas, for holidays, you know, getting together as a family, traveling together as a family. I have friends who adopted one child from a sibling group, and then, you know, they have a connection with other members in that sibling group. Neither have connections with birth family, but they have connections with other siblings. So, you know, most of the time, the ideal is to have siblings adopted together or have them in the same foster home. But when that is not possible, or when there's, you know, sometimes a significant age gap, often that won't be the case. So knowing, you will always know that there is a sibling, and in the past, there's been a lot of closed adoptions where there's been absolutely no connection to other family members, and that's thankfully really changing right now. And it's been, in the past, what judges have done is they've made suggestions. You know, adoptive parents have said, yeah, absolutely, you know, we're going to be open to being connected to other siblings. We're going to be open to being connected to aunts, uncles, grandparents. And then that didn't happen. So what courts have done now is said, okay, so we're not going to make it an option anymore. We're going to court order you to have a connection with the family, and you'll know this ahead of time. 90% of the time, you'll know this before you even meet the child, that there's going to be an openness order in this family's life, that this child is going to have some sort of connection. And, you know, it may not be completely spelled out, but you know that there will be some sort of formal connection.
Great, thank you. If folks who are listening have any questions, feel free to just write them in the chat. Otherwise, it's going to be just a conversation between me and Charles, which also is fine. But yeah, and how do you feel CAS addresses? Oh, there's a question. I'll leave my question till after. So I'm just going to read out the questions for folks who are going to be watching this later, and then also for the video. Or Azar, if you feel like you want to come on and ask, you're also more than welcome to do that. If you want me to read it, I can read it as well. You can let me know in the chat what you prefer. Okay, so I'll read it. Okay, perfect. So can you speak a little about fostering as a possible step towards adoption? So examples, fostering a child in order to potentially adopt them later, or is it best not to think about the two in that way? So the paths, I guess, as I was asking around thinking of fostering as a step to adoption or not.
Yeah, so in many agencies in Ontario, they have a different view when it comes to what they call is foster to adopt. So they'll, you know, some agencies exclusively do foster to adopt, and the only benefit of that would be there's less transitions for this child. But then Toronto, it doesn't do foster to adopt, and the reason for not doing that is, as a foster parent, your basic thing is, how do you help the birth family reunite and reconnect with this child? So if your mentality is, I want to adopt this child as soon as they come into your home, that's kind of the opposite of what a foster parent is supposed to be and how the foster parent is supposed to support. So you're supposed to be there to possibly teach the birth mother or father, certain how to connect with their child, facilitate visitation, facilitate with the, CAS, a lot of different parenting things. You're there to support the birth family on, connecting with their child, on how not to feel guilty about how this child came into care. So if you're constantly in the back of your head thinking, I really want to adopt, I hope this fails for the birth family, well, then that's not what fostering is really supposed to be about, which is why Toronto and agencies kind of really try to separate the two. If you're looking at fostering as simply a way of you getting used to being a parent, that can be great. But what you're looking at is, this child that it's coming into your home is most likely going to go back to their family. Most children that come into care don't stay in care, which would be the ideal, right? So, is that something that you as a person can handle? The constant moving, constant sort of different children in your care. Can you separate that? So that's something that's a little bit different from adoption. So if you're going strictly for adoption, that once a child comes into your home, that this is meant to be a permanent thing, right? A permanent family. For example, like my family, we've done fostering, and some of the children have stayed connected with us. The majority have not. They've gone back to their birth families.
And it's important to think also about the emotional toll that it takes, right? That is included with fostering and then adopting. That especially with fostering, what I've heard from folks who do have fostered, and that's something that I'm hoping to also do later on in my life, is that they're also, these kids are also coming with all the things that have happened to them so far, and then they're sometimes only with you for, sometimes my like a friend of mine only had a kid for 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks were very, very intensive. And then all of a sudden they were gone, right? So really thinking about as someone who is wanting to adopt or thinking of fostering, the emotional toll that it takes, and what makes sense for you and your family, and also if there's other kids in your life or in your family. So Marcia, your question around having kids in your life already in your home, if you're fostering, like what does that look like to have kids coming in and out of their lives, and being able to have those conversations with them consistently, right? Like, how does it feel for you to have people, for this person to be here and then they're gone now? Or so just thinking about that emotional toll that it takes on not just yourself, but also your family. Emily had a question as well. So thanks for the presentation, Charles. I'm wondering if there are any stats on foster families who end up adopting the child in placement. I've done some reading for Toronto CAS, and the emphasis is of course on getting the children back to their homes. But are there interested families who do explore fostering as a path? So a very similar question to what you asked. But the question is, are there interested families who do explore fostering as a path to adoption?
Yep. So yeah. So the stats, I was looking at them actually a couple of days ago, and the majority of children who are adopted in Ontario are adopted from the foster parents that they had. So I like the children that came from my current foster children. I mean, my current adopted children, their foster parents adopted, of the 20 children that they had in foster care, they've adopted 4 of them. Right. So it does happen actually more than not. And one thing that Aruna alluded to when it comes to your family is people often, depending on the age when you're fostering, the age of your children that you already have, they will often forget about the emotional toll that it takes on them. Not just having children come and go, But if, they have to share a room, or when these children come, they're coming with a lot of trauma, and they're coming with a lot of needs. So if you're really focusing on these children that are coming to you, how do you then support the children that are already with you? So really balancing that, and really um, looking at your self-care, but looking at the care of your children that are already in your home, and how are they being supported during this process as well. When I had children in my home, we were often in the school, at the police station, different things, and the children that we already had were getting slightly neglected and feeling left out. And I've heard this from many families, that their children felt that the other children were more important than them. So really, keeping that in mind if you have already children, what that looks like.
So Emily also wants to hear about your personal journey in fostering, which I want to get to for sure. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question to that, in particular around race. And what your experience, and I guess if you want to talk about that in context of your experience with fostering, what has been, because I know so you were explaining that you and your husband were fostering and adopting together. And so what does it look like in terms of race dynamics, and also like having white children in your care versus having kids of color, and particularly Black kids, why that's important to you. So if you can talk about the nuances that happen around providing care to children of color, and then also how maybe, I know you can't speak for your husband, what that means for him as a white person as well.
Yeah, so we've had quite a few children in care. Some of them have been white, most of them have been children of color in our care. And the thing that angers me the most when it comes to CES has been the treatment of the children in care who have been children of color. So often I will look at the exact same child with very similar situation, and the different treatment and the different focus of those children, of the children of color. And often 99% of the workers have been white workers who have not quite understood the dynamics of Black families. Most often is what I've related to, the children that have come into our home, and just basic things. Some of the trainings that we've taken and seen with CS has been like how to care for Black children's hair, because a lot of the foster parents in the system are white foster parents, and they're caring for Black children, and some of them have no idea how to care for simple things like Black children's hair, what products are needed, what some of the white families have no Black friends. So they're being really like taken out of their communities and not in any way being supported. When you're, adopting a child of color, one of the first questions they ask you is, what do you know? Who do you have in your, circle that's going to help you support this child? If you're adopting a Black child, who is going to help you support them? Not, hey, I have this Black friend. No, it's how close is this person? In what way are they going to be involved in your child's life? And it's the same for fostering. In what way is this child going to be supporting you and going to be supporting this person going to be supporting you and going to be supporting your child? Yeah, the days of long past when children would just come into the home and not be supported within their culture. That is one of the primary things. And if you don't, as a white family or as a white person, don't have an answer to that, the adoption worker and the foster care worker will like really like pound you on that answer or look elsewhere. And they'll be very blunt with you.
As they should be.
Yeah.
As they should be. Yeah, so I guess so Emily would love to hear more, and all of us, I'm sure, would love to hear more about your experiences with fostering, and particularly duration, ages, your emotional experiences, and adapting your lives, etc. And I also just wanted to check in with Marcia to make sure that if she had any follow-up questions, because we had asked at the very jump. So if Marcia wants to write in the thing if there's anything else, but yeah, if you'd love to share with us, it'd be great to hear about, especially around your emotional experiences and the adaptation of your life and how that shifted things.
Yeah, so I started fostering in 2011, and I actually started my relationship with my husband. He moved in the same week as I started fostering. So it was quite an emotional time for us as a family. And one thing that I would recommend is really, if you're looking at fostering, if you're looking at adoption, to really, really think about what is the emotional toll going to be on your family. Because we didn't do that. I just kind of like said, I'm going to foster. And the children kind of just showed up. So it really wasn't much of a discussion with me and my partner at the time. And he was very overwhelmed by the situation. And I was overwhelmed by the sort of the uncommunication per se between us, and what was our parenting role going to look like in this family. And one thing that when I started fostering, I didn't really think about is that co-parent, the state, and what are my relationships going to be with these different social workers. I just thought, okay, these kids would come into our home and I would be parenting them, which is definitely not the case. Yeah, you are in a parenting role and you're in a caregiver role, but as they will tell you over and over and over again, you are not the parent. The state is the parent, and the state makes the ultimate decision on these children's lives. So it's been very challenging, and a lot of advocating for these kids that have been in our care. Advocating, we had a trans youth who lived with us, and we had to advocate in many ways for supports for her, supports for her transitioning, supports for wigs, for different things for her that she needed, that the CS worker was like, I don't know about that. I don't think, like, we can't single this person out. I don't think they really need this, sort of thing. And also advocating in schools. Schools were very challenging for, especially where I live now in Oakville, for our Black trans youth that live with us. There were a lot of racist comments from other students, from teachers. Some were subtle, some were not so subtle. So we had to deal with that and call it as we saw it, and said, yeah, your comment, it's just plain out racist. You wouldn't say that to a white child. Saying that, in particular, saying your child is too loud. This is how my child talks. Child is not too loud. This is how my child talks. If you don't like it, deal with it. We've had social workers in that particular school say, yeah, I can't say stuff like this, but thank you for saying something like that. Like, we had conversations with some of our youth around how people perceive you as a Black child. We had children at camp, and the child was said, the counselor said, your child is angry all the time. And I was like, I don't think so. You've known this child for 10 years. Child's not angry. I don't know what's going on in this situation. I know my child very well. My child is not an angry child. So the problem is probably you. Or maybe something happened and, the child, somebody said something to the child, or I'm not sure what happened, but maybe, you should ask the child what happened. Um, yeah, so I mean, yeah, we've had a lot of challenges that way. And we've had a lot of, like, my husband has had screaming matches with social workers in our home where I've had to say, okay, this conversation is over. You, Miss Social Worker, need to leave my home right now. You're supposed to be here to support us, not to sit here and argue with us. And we've had to, go to supervisors and whatnot. And it's been interesting. It's been an interesting journey. Just to give a little background, we've had the first two children that came into us in 2011 have been permanent parts of our family. They still live in my home. We spend Christmases together. Although we have not formally adopted them, they're definitely our children. They've spoken on panels and talked about how what it was like to really see us as their parents. We've also had children who've come to us for 2 very intense weeks and then have gone home or have gone to other foster families who are able to support them in a way that we weren't because of, we had more children or we couldn't focus on their particular needs. We've had children come to us for what they call respite, where they needed either their foster family was on vacation or they needed to just like a break or something. We've taken our foster children to Mexico. We've always treated our foster children as part of our family, whether they're part of our family for a short period of time or part of our family for the rest of their lives. They're always part of our family. And my extended family, my aunts and uncles and cousins, and there's many, many of us, have always treated our children as always part of the family.
That's so beautiful. I love that. I think it's really important to think about the ways in which I think kids are also just thrown around. Like when you said that they sometimes even come to you while their foster family's on vacation, I was like, that's so hard and awful, that like, oh, we're going on vacation, can you get rid of these kids? The kind of like a feelings of abandonment that must exist for these little people. It feels really hard to like sit with. That's a really, really hard reality. But also so beautiful that you and in your family, you choose to really, connect with these kids and make sure that they are feeling really good about being with you. Thunder has a question actually. We hear lots about the emotional toll of helping young people with mental health and or trauma work. Can you speak to any experiences with physical health challenges that come up for children, youth in your care? And how do you deal as a parent who supports you? So we talk about the emotional toll, but physical challenges that kids might have, physical health things that come up for youth and children in your care. So how do you deal with that? And then who supports you in that?
We haven't had a lot of, at least in my family, a lot of children who have had physical challenges, but the local CAS would support in that way when we're talking about, the financial cost of it. But also the emotional support. So really connecting with other families who are in similar situations is I think way more important than really connecting, at least in my experience, has been more important than connecting with the social worker. Unless they have lived experience. I've often seen this disconnect when it comes to talking with the social workers. But when we're talking with other families, it's really been helpful. Yeah, I mean, what we've often dealt with is like counseling, children with emotional issues, with a lot of trauma, and some of the trauma that we've dealt with is really, like, if I look at my past, has really connected me to my children, and has also triggered me in many ways. So really having, support for myself when I know I'm going to be triggered by an experience or trauma that my child is dealing with, whether that's children who've experienced abuse, children who've experienced many different neglect or any of that stuff. How is that, you really have to look at how is that going to, on a daily basis, re-trauma you, and how are you getting support for that? Yes, there'll be some support with CS, but often people will say, well, I don't want to say anything to my CS worker because they'll look bad at me and stuff like that. So that's really where you look at places like Adopt for Life, and really connect with them or connect with other adoptive families, especially if you're a family of color or a queer family, connecting with other families who can relate and support you. And yeah, I don't think it really answered the question, but.
No, thanks for that. I think that I think from what I feel like when we talk about like physical, like health challenges, I think especially with foster care kids and kids who are put into your care for very short amounts of time, I think that it's good to know that CAS will provide supports, but I think that there's like a lot of things that people don't think about, when, especially considering they're like, oh, foster kids, like you just hang out with some kids for a while, but there's so much that comes with supporting these little people. Thunder said you did now in COA, so yeah.
And one thing I want to say about the supports, when we talk about supports, there are so many supports for children in care that foster parents don't realize. And often the social workers either don't realize, or I don't know if there's some sort of budget going on, but they will often not volunteer the information that there is these supports available. So I would say advocate, advocate, advocate for the children if you're going to be fostering or even adopting. And what was the worst I could say? No. But if you don't ask the question, then the supports will never happen, right? So, our children got laptops. Each one of them got laptops because, in this day and age, you need a laptop for school. So they all got laptops. When they're in foster care, their child tax benefit goes to the agency. So that money is available for whatever reason for the child. So when you're talking about summer camp, that money is available for summer camp. So, it's not just, the money that you're getting for the child that you have to save up and spend for certain things. There's extra money in there from the child tax benefit that can be used for different things, which people, like when I first started, I didn't know that. I thought it was just like I thought the child just didn't get it. I didn't realize that the agency actually kept it. Now, what they do as well is the child tax benefit, when we're talking about adoption, the money comes to you and goes into an education fund for the child. Right? It doesn't stay with the government. It doesn't stay with the agency because it's not their money.
That's really good to know. So we're coming to time. If there are no more questions, if folks have any questions, please write them in the chat. This is your last chance. And for closing, if there's any advice or, for people who are considering fostering, considering adoption, especially with, thinking about the politics around it and the emotions and the things that come with it, what are some like base advice that you give to parents who are considering this path?
I would really say, as a family, really talk about it, really explore it. If you're a white family, really look at what historically has happened to communities, and what are you going to do for your to help address this as a family. If you choose to adopt, if you choose to foster, and if you choose to foster, how on a daily basis are you going to combat a lot of the issues of trauma that these children are going to experience? Because every adoption is based on trauma. Every placement in foster care is based on trauma. It does not matter what age the child came. So this is something that they're going to have to always deal with. So really exploring in yourself and a family, what are you going to do for the rest of this child's life to really address this as a community? If you're, adopting a child of color, how are you going to, even if you're planning on doing it 5 years from now, how are you going to bring more people of color into your life right now in a significant way, not just I know this Black person at the bar? How are you significantly going to really open your life? How are you significantly going to really change the way your mind works and the way that it sees the world? And are you going to be an ally to these kids, or are you really going to be an advocate for these kids and changing the way that their world is going to exist?
Thank you for that. Yeah. And I would say, I think a lot of times people, are like, oh, I just want a kid in my life. I just want to support young people and little people to like grow. And that's really beautiful. And I think a great place to start. I also think that we have to consider the systemic ways that people have, as you said, ended up in care. And I often tell people, when they're like, oh, I just want little people around me. I'm like, well, there are lots of families of color who also could use this support, right? So that their kids don't end up in care. If we look at institutionally, like, do your neighbors have like food for groceries? Could you help them with food? Could you help them with like taking care of the kids or like babysitting or free childcare so their mom could like finish that course that she's doing? Like what are some ways that we can actually address these systemic things that are happening to families and in our communities that already exist? That will allow for us to have little people in our life, but also will not perpetuate or contribute to this really systemic violence that occurs, right? And I think if we think about it in like mutual aid and care and community care for each other, that could look a lot different, right? I mean, I think my goal in life is that we don't have any kids in foster care, or that we, that our families are able to support each other and our communities are able to support each other and the little people in our life. But it's really important to think about how we do that work with each other and for each other now. But yeah, thank you so much for all your time and knowledge, Charles. This has been really informative for a lot of folks. And I'm really grateful that it's been grounded in these conversations of the systemic violence that happens in order that bring us to this point of having a lot of little people who are really traumatized and hurting, but also healing, and also like have the opportunity to have families like yours. So thank you for your care and the ways that you bring all of these messages to us. And I just want to say thank you to Thunder and for opening us up and supporting us in these conversations and this knowledge sharing today, and also to Gab for also being such an incredible human in general, but also making sure that these things happen and are offered to our communities. Thank you for joining us today. And again, if you have any other further questions, feel free to check out the Birthmark page and also Seed and Sprout page, and you can share any questions you have there. I'm sure like Charles and I can figure out a way to get that information to you if you do need. This will also all be recorded and then put on the Facebook and then also the YouTube. So again, thank you everyone for joining, and you have a great rest of your day.